All right, let's talk about something huge, an idea that pretty much defines the world we live in today: nationalism. We're going to dig into the story of how this idea of a nation even started, and how it completely, and I mean completely, redrew the map of the world. But first, just think about this for a second. What if countries didn't exist? It sounds crazy, right? But this world we know, with all its flags, borders, and national anthems, it's actually a pretty new invention. For most of history, you wouldn't say I'm French or I'm German. Your loyalty was to a king, or maybe your city, or just your local boss. So picture this. It's 1848. Europe is this big messy patchwork of giant empires. And a French artist, Frédéric Soriot, imagines something totally different, something completely radical. He creates these prints that aren't just art, they're a vision, a dream of what the world could be. And what a dream it was. You see this long parade of people from all over, marching past a Statue of Liberty. They're holding the torch of enlightenment and the Charter of the Rights of Man. And look down on the ground, you see all the broken crowns and symbols of the old kings. This was basically a revolution on paper, a huge statement that the future belonged to the people, not the monarchs.
To really get why this was such a wild idea, we need to understand the world he was living in. Because for the most part, it was a world without nations as we think of them.
So what's the big difference between an empire and this newfangled idea of a nation-state? Well, think of an empire like the Habsburg Empire. It was this massive territory with all sorts of different people, Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, who spoke different languages and had different cultures, all ruled by one emperor. Your loyalty was to him. The idea of a nation-state flips that completely. It's about a community of citizens who feel like they share a common identity, a history. Your loyalty isn't to a person, it's to the nation itself. So where did this world-changing idea come from? Well, you can pinpoint the exact moment it really caught fire. It all starts with the French Revolution, back in 1789. This was the absolute game changer. The revolution brought in this idea of sovereignty. And all that means is that power, real, ultimate power, was no longer in the hands of one king. It was transferred to the people, to the citizens of France. They were the nation now, and they would decide their own destiny. That right there, that's the foundation of every modern country. Okay, but how do you get millions of people to suddenly feel like they're all part of the same team? The French revolutionaries were geniuses at this. It was like modern-day nation branding. They created a new flag, the tricolor, they wrote anthems, made people take oaths, they created the same laws for everyone, and, this is a big one, they pushed the French language across the country to replace all the little regional dialects. They were literally building a French identity from scratch. Which brings us to one of history's great paradoxes, Napoleon Bonaparte. I mean, this guy comes along, takes over, and crowns himself emperor. It seems like he's killing the whole democratic dream, right? But as his armies marched all over Europe, they brought the ideas of the revolution with them. His legal code, the Napoleonic Code, talked about equality and got rid of the old feudal systems. So you have this dictator who, weirdly enough, ended up spreading the ideas of freedom. And once those seeds were planted, man, did they grow. The idea of the nation started catching fire all across Europe, and it set up this huge clash between the old world and the new. After Napoleon was finally defeated, a battle for the soul of Europe really began. On one side, you had what we call liberal nationalism. This was the team of the new, rising middle class. They wanted constitutions, governments elected by the people, and individual freedom. On the other side, you had the old guard, the conservatives. The kings, the princes, the aristocrats who wanted to keep things just the way they were, with tradition, monarchy, and their own power intact. This was the fight that defined the 1800s. But nationalism wasn't just about politics. It was also a thing of the heart, and a lot of that came from a cultural movement called Romanticism. Romantics believed that a nation's true spirit, what some German thinkers called the Volksgeist, or spirit of the people, wasn't in some fancy king's court. No, you found it with the everyday people, in their folk songs, their poems, and their stories. And this idea made culture into a powerful weapon. You had German thinkers like Herder going around collecting old folktales to prove there was a unique German spirit. In a place like Poland, which had been literally carved up and erased from the map, just speaking the Polish language became a revolutionary act. You even had famous poets like Lord Byron going off to fight for Greece's independence because they saw it as the heart of European culture. So you've got these political ideas, these cultural movements, and on top of all that, widespread poverty and hunger. It all finally just exploded in one single incredible year, 1848. Revolutions erupted all over the continent. People were hungry for bread, for sure, but they were also hungry for their own nations. Now, a lot of those 1848 revolutions didn't actually succeed, but the dream of the nation, that didn't die. It just changed. The next phase of building nations wasn't going to be about speeches and dreams alone. It was going to be about power, politics, and forging nations in what was called blood and iron.
And nobody, and I mean nobody, represented this new tough-as-nails approach better than Prussia's main man, Otto von Bismarck. His whole philosophy was right there in this famous quote: "The great questions of the day will not be decided by speeches, but by iron and blood." He was not messing around.
And Bismarck wasn't just talking a big game, he backed it up. The liberals had tried to unify Germany with the Bates in 1848 and failed. Bismarck was going to do it with the Prussian army. He very cleverly started 3 wars in 7 years, against Denmark, Austria, and then France. And once they were won, bam! In 1871, a unified German empire was declared. Italy's story is just as amazing, but it played out more like a 3-act drama. First, you had the dreamer, Giuseppe Mazzini, who planted the idea of a united Italy in people's minds. Then you get the strategist, a clever politician named Cavour, who used smart diplomacy and war to unite the North. And for the grand finale, you have the action hero, Giuseppe Garibaldi, and his volunteer army of red shirts, who heroically freed the South. Put them all together, the brain, the politician, and the hero, and by 1870, you finally have one Italy. And just to show you there was no single recipe for this stuff, you have the very strange case of Britain. A nation wasn't born in a big, fiery revolution there. Nope, it was a much, much slower process where English culture, money, and power gradually took over and absorbed the Welsh, the Scots, and the Irish to create what we now call the United Kingdom. But as all these powerful new countries were being built, the idea of nationalism itself began to warp. As the century came to a close, it started to take a much darker, much more dangerous turn.
Yeah, by the late 1800s, that original, beautiful dream of liberty and freedom was fading fast. Nationalism became less about let us be free and more about we have to be stronger than them. It turned into a competition, a struggle for dominance that fueled the mad dash for empires and colonies all over the world.
You can really see the 2 different faces of nationalism here. What started out as this idealistic movement for democracy that celebrated what made each culture unique, well, it twisted into a fight for power and territory. It became intolerant of outsiders and was used by big empires as an excuse to grab more land and more power for themselves. And the end game of this dangerous shift was nothing short of a catastrophe. All of these aggressive, competitive national feelings and rivalries finally zeroed in on one extremely volatile area, the Balkans. It became known as the powder keg of Europe. And in 1914, that powder keg finally exploded, sparking the First World War and changing the world forever. So, this single idea, nationalism, gave us the world we live in. It was born from a beautiful dream of freedom, but we've seen how it can curdle into a nightmare of competition and conflict. Which leaves us with a really big question. One that's just as important today as it was 100 years ago. Nationalism created our world, but will it also be the thing that tears it all apart?